please help me welcome Stanton Stevens.
Well, thank you very much, Ed. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about things that are so interesting to me and so rarely discussed. We'll talk about why people don't talk about God even in this talk. And as Ed said, please hold on to your questions. I'm really interested in your questions, but at the end we'll do that because we're videotaping the talk, and that's something else to be aware of. There's a camera back there because these talks go online. This research of mine is mainly in the writings of Henry Laurency. He's a Swedish philosopher. His writings have been translated into English. He's a student of all the Theosophical writings. He studied Bailey, of course. He's plugged in to information sources in ways I have no idea how he gets the information he has. But it's incredible. It's the most lucid, jargon-free presentation of esoterics that I've found. And it's for the Western mind, you know, that wants a concrete basis and not fuzzy concepts. So to me, it's been great. I'll read maybe a couple of quotes as we go, but I'll basically be encouraging you to go read his material. I hope this inspires you to check it out. It's all online, Laurency.com, and I've got, if you didn't get the handout, it's over at the front there, but you can pick it up after. It's full of quotes, 7 pages of Laurency quotes. I start all of my talks with a particular exercise that I invite you to participate in. As we'll be discussing, Laurency, Pythagoras, his source, say that the whole purpose of all of the things we go through here is the evolution of consciousness. Consciousness being the key thing. So let's take a moment and be aware, meaning conscious of consciousness. A particular trick that we can do as human beings, separates us from animals, we can take note of being a conscious being. If we are having presence of mind, that means being present in consciousness. If we can track our consciousness back to the point of awareness that is behind our attention, then we've actually contacted something very deep in ourselves. And this exercise helps me a great deal in these talks. So thank you. Well, we're going to talk about God and the biblical God, and we'll even talk about the New Age God. Ding! I need a bell. I wonder if there's one I could have borrowed from the bookstore. God runs deep. You know, we've grew up with ideas about God and things that are sacred to us. We may not yet, until we've got the right experience, have discovered all the things that are sacred to us. That's a good question. And sometimes it's surprising. I work with people from India, and they're in India. I'm talking to them on the phone all the time in my job. And not too long ago, there was a crisis. The server room was overheating, and you know, I'm in IT. So I was talking to them, and they'd get back to me with updates on the phone, and there was an update. The server room has reached 120 degrees. And I said, holy cow. And then I realized that I was talking to my Hindu coworkers in India. And a moment later, I had to apologize, and they laughed, and everything was fine. But please don't take offense if I touch on any of your sacred cows today. I don't mean to do anything but respect your right, and which I do treat as a right, to think and believe whatever it is that you want, whatever helps you, gets you through the night, you know, whatever gets you through human incarnation and works for you. That's the ultimate criteria. Does this belief and philosophy get me more of what I want or less? Does it help me? Does it help me in the direction that I think I'm going? Well, We're going to talk about directions here when we talk about God, since God seems to have some ideas of his own. We're going to talk about that too. I just can't seem to print these big enough anymore. Got to get the glasses out. If I bring up God with my neighbors, they're kind of uncomfortable. My coworkers, I don't bring up God with at all. But why is that? Why can't we just talk about God? Well, historically, there have been a lot of people trying to make us afraid of God. And they've succeeded, actually, and to large measure. People are scared of a God that can sentence them to eternal damnation. And then there are the fanatics. That hasn't won God any followers or particular favor by having people that are so drunk on God thoughts that they insist that you must think them too. That's never been a great approach. So people are scared when people start talking to them about God. And when God is brought, when religion basically is under the control of people who use it to get power over others, which it has usually been, unfortunately. It's a sad story with religion. When religion was running things in Europe, it was called the Dark Ages. And when there was finally enough of a scientific, philosophical movement to overcome religious rule of Europe, it was called the Enlightenment. So from dark to light, from religion running everything to not, seems to be the trend. And I'll be the first to point out that religion has tried to teach us a million crazy things. That you can't learn history from religion, obviously, or scientific facts, or frankly, much about the meaning of life these days, religious presentations. But that doesn't mean none of it's true. And what they're trying to get across, what it's all based on, there's some really deep truths in there. And when we talk about God, we're getting to the core of them. When you have religion messing with you like it does, children, of course, have to pick up all kinds of crazy religious things and get rid of them if they're going to approach esoteric philosophy like we're doing now. It's easy to take the attitude of that we can never know. Just say, well, obviously these approaches that are offered out there are terrible and we can't know what happens after death and what it's all about. But to say that is a way of saying, be content with your ignorance. And I will never be that. So, thus my efforts. And the reason I have this information, because I've cared enough to learn it. I've made a lot of effort to go out there and find it. It has mattered so much to me that there are points in my life where I said, I can't take another step until I have some answers. I need to know what's going on. That's why some people have more information than others, because they care enough to wonder, and they insist on some answers. And typically in these talks, I would go through all the human-created ideas about these topics and then get onto the esoteric side. I'm going to reverse that this time. I think it's important to dive right into what esoteric says. And maybe for those who are watching this on YouTube, this will help them figure out right away whether they want to watch it or not. But esoterics is very clear on all these concepts. I'm not one that likes fuzzy concepts of things, and I'm very happy to be able to say some very definite things. Now, whether you can prove these things to yourself or not, some you can, some have extra abilities to prove things to themselves, People have meditated longer. They've acquired senses beyond our ordinary senses. But a lot of this, I recommend taking as a hypothesis, and you prove it out through seeing if it works in your life to think this could be possible. So, esoterics. Henry Laurency says that Pythagoras taught, the original spiritual teacher for the West was Pythagoras, that he taught over 2,500 years ago the philosophy of hylozoics, saying that everything, these days it's defined to mean everything's alive. What it meant then was everything has consciousness. That's what Pythagoras meant, that latent in everything is consciousness in some form. In fact, he said that the a priori three attributes, aspects, whatever you want to call them, of everything that you have, this the ultimate trinity from which everything else is derived, is matter, and let's just agree on that one. In debating, it's pointless. It's in motion, yep, okay. Consciousness, those three things can't be derived from anything else. You can't subdivide them into some other two different things. They simply are what they are. And consciousness being, of course, the most important one, because it's the reason all the matter is in motion. And thus our exercise earlier, focusing on consciousness. When you start with those three things, and you look at everything changing, it becomes, the next statement you can make from it is that it's all about consciousness evolving. Consciousness sets matter into motion for reasons. It's trying to accomplish something, trying to, thinking is moving mental material around. It's all manipulation of matter, according to Hylozoics. Everything is something, is what I like to say. We think, we move mental matter around, we have emotions, we're manipulating emotional matter, and the point of it is the expansion of consciousness. We've been at this for a long time, according to Laurency, and it may not seem like we make big breakthroughs because it's one lifetime at a time, but the realization that helps us suddenly have a new awareness of how things work, of how people work, of how we ourselves work, helps us anticipate the future better, helps us respond better to our current situation, suffer less, enjoy more. These realizations are all part of the evolution of consciousness. The evolution that Hylozoics talks about, that we've been participating in, according to Hylozoics, started millions and millions of years ago, and we didn't just get this level of consciousness as a kind of gift. We earned every bit of it, moving through the mineral kingdom as a point of consciousness that's almost purely latent, passive consciousness. Then we worked in the plant kingdom to acquire subjective consciousness, awareness of ourselves as bodies reaching for, plant bodies reaching for light, reaching into the earth. That's subjective and an emotional awareness. Then from the plant kingdom to the animal kingdom is a huge jump in consciousness. The jump to objective consciousness, sensory awareness of everything else and the other conscious things, and the ability to move among it all. And then from the animal to the human, self-consciousness, the breakthrough into an individualized identity that happens when you can know yourself to be somebody. Then you start working on what it means to be an individual. And that's really what the human kingdom is all about in terms of consciousness. Working on our individual identities, struggling with the loneliness of it all, but gradually towards the end of our passage through the human kingdom, we start to see how we're alike, and unity starts to take more and more precedence in our minds, and we are beginning to be prepared for the jump, the huge consciousness jump to the next kingdom, which of course many, many beings have done. Humans are relatively unaware of this mostly, because we're not that far along as a kingdom. We're not just about to be jumping into the new. But the next kingdom, consciousness, is collective. We participate in a consciousness that is shared. That's very different than what we can imagine as humans. We're really tuned into the individual nature here. But and we have to have completely finished refining our individual nature and our personal way of approaching life in the human kingdom to be ready to merge into that collective consciousness. We don't lose our identities. We maintain our identities because it created such a strong identity here. We'd be swept away in the sea of collective consciousness if we hadn't become very unique individuals with a point of action that each of us can take. And that's very much needed in the higher kingdoms as much as here. When we join that collective consciousness, there's work to do. There are messes to clean up that humanity made, for instance. There are all kinds of things working with other kingdoms besides human. The task of these higher beings that have graduated from human are, beyond our comprehension for the most part. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So These beings that have gone to the next kingdom, the state of mind they're in collective consciousness is godlike, essentially, to us, to meet any one of these beings who are called in the Theosophical and Bailey literature masters, and let's not get hung up on that word. They are called that because they have mastered everything that we've struggled with as human beings. They've mastered everything to do with the worlds, the three worlds of physical, emotional, and mental life. They're not only masters of how to express and be in those worlds, the material of those worlds is completely at their command. That's being really done with those worlds. So they're essentially gods to us. They have godlike powers in this world, godlike knowledge. To them, the perfect record of the past is visible. They can see everything that's ever happened in the past is almost like a part of the present to them. Of course, that's a very different way to look at things. All the chains of causality that have put us where we are now are visible. We struggle so much in the dark here as humans trying to figure out why it's like it is. But to these beings, it's very clear. And to some degree, the future is clear. If you've got chains of causality, then you kind of know where they're going. And although I did read something on Facebook recently that said, our lives are determined by future events. I thought, no, I don't think so. Because I don't think there's any God in the universe that knows what random thought will be crossing my mind 10 years from today, at any particular second of that day. There are probabilities of the future, is all that even the most omniscient being in the present can say about the future, is probabilities. And of course, if they've made their plans that the entire Earth should be lifted to a higher sphere of vibration, well, that's going to happen. But they can predict that accurately because they planned it. But when it comes down to us, we're very unpredictable. Another thing about the beings in the higher worlds is that they've all gone through the human kingdom. That's how you get there. Just like we had to go through these other kingdoms, they don't start out as gods, and we will become like them. This is promised by the higher beings. This is part of our future. They, every consciousness that participates in what we might call God has been human. So it understands us pretty well, despite how little we can understand them. They have no ego, in particular, not like we think of ego as a human ego. They have no desire to be worshipped or to give commands or condemn or insist on being obeyed or punish or be jealous of who we care about in the divine kingdoms. None of that applies to beings who are freed from human ego problems. Another thing about these beings that are beyond human is that they're perfectly organized. Another thing hard for us to imagine, our organizations tend to be ways for the more powerful people to exert their control over the less powerful people, and that's not how it works. In perfectly egoless collective consciousness, when beings can see where they fit into things, they know what their capacity is relative to what needs to be done. They know which beings have gone much further than them, who they should listen to, and they know which ones haven't come to where they've gotten to. It's not a secret. It even has to remain a secret for us, because if we start thinking we know where somebody is evolutionarily, we make the biggest mistakes. Whatever that person says is all true. Or, that person's primitive. I can certainly speak for what that person needs to do. That's where we make mistakes. As humans, we don't know where people are at. In this perfect organization that they have, they work in basically in perfect cooperation. Nobody is forced. Everything is voluntary. The law of freedom obtains. Laurency says law of freedom is that you've got the right to do whatever you want to do, as long as it doesn't impinge on the equal right of others. Now that's violated all the time. We have powerful corporate interests violating that to their ultimate suffering, because the law of sowing and reaping says when you violate somebody else's sovereign freedoms, you're going to essentially lose your freedoms. And these corporations, as much as we think of them as soulless things, are a bunch of people. And they all participate and therefore all share in this bad sowing, bad reaping, and I'm glad I'm not participating in that. The next kingdom beyond human we're trying to get to, this organization of these beings is called the planetary hierarchy. And let's not let that word get loaded down with human concepts either. This is a perfect organization. It's nothing like a human hierarchy. They have a particular role in the planetary being. The whole planet, as above, so below, just like we have in our body centers of energy, chakras, the head center, the heart center, solar plexus, etc. So does the whole planet. And in the planetary body, as you might put it, the planetary hierarchy is the heart center. To be in this next kingdom of consciousness, it has a lot of names, the Buddhic plane, kingdom, the world 46, Laurency numbers things, which turns out to be really handy, so you're not arguing about Sanskrit terms. The kingdom of heaven is a pretty apt description of it because there's no more human ego dividing everybody. It's all in perfect, loving unison that everybody is operating. So hard for us to imagine, but really so wonderful. Let's get there. This hierarchy, made up of the masters, is made up of those who have graduated from the human kingdom, made the transition. They're serving humanity and all the other kingdoms on the planet, of which we don't even know about all of them because not all of them are as dense a material as we're made out of. At the head of this hierarchy is someone whose name is Maitreya. They've let us know his name. He's also known as the world teacher, also known as the Bodhisattva, and about 2,000 years ago was known as Christ. It's kind of an executive position, interestingly enough. He's got a lot of things to manage in that position. And we use he because, that's traditionally what Maitreya has gone by. There's also the planetary head center. Like talking the heart center. The planetary head center is where the most advanced beings on the entire planet function. It's called the planetary government. They are supervising millions of year spans of evolution of all these kingdoms. The hierarchy, when it's got a quandary as to what to do with humanity and all of its crazy things it does, it might go to the planetary government and say, well, advise us, please, because humans they're just, we can't seem to do anything that they offer them a single good opportunity that they recognize and take. That's one of their problems. So, this evolution of consciousness is going on through the beings in these kingdoms beyond our imagination. The most advanced being on the planet, head of the planetary government, to even talk about a being's consciousness like that is to speculate in ways that don't actually approach reality. We actually get to meet this being, though, at some point as we move along. We get to meet Maitreya. The planetary, the head of the planetary government is not interested in meeting us until we become rational beings, which means we're no longer human. So it'll be a while. So boiling this down a bit, in esoteric terms, you find God transcendent, the concept of everything beyond, above, higher level consciousnesses. That's God that we are aspiring to contact, to become, that is running the show, even though we don't know it. And there is God immanent. Laurency discusses both. God immanent refers to our unlosable share that each of us has in the cosmic total consciousness. One of the things that esoteric says about consciousness is that there's just one, really. It's one great consciousness that we share in to whatever degree of ability we have to share in it. That's a bigger and bigger piece of all the consciousness as our consciousness evolves. God immanent meaning no one is cut off from God. We all have a share in that God consciousness. I should say that in the planetary hierarchy, they don't use the word God. They don't have to. They can be more specific. God's a very general kind of word. They can talk about whatever being it is. They can talk about the head of the planetary government. They can talk about, Christ or whoever, Maitreya. They're working with beings at all times. The God immanent is something that they would like us to realize, to feel more of our connectedness in this consciousness and to be looking for that piece of God's consciousness in each other. And then there's something else, not necessarily God transcendent or God immanent. There's both of the above, our own souls that are kind of poised between. I have a whole talk on that where I can get into the details because it's really one of the least understood things out there, our own souls. There is a guardian angel called Ogoides that is standing in for us at a higher level of consciousness. We're trying to reach that being's level of consciousness. It is dedicated to helping us get through the human kingdom. It's been associated with us since we made the jump from the animal kingdom. It created this, what's called the causal body. We've got a physical body, an emotional body that we register emotions with, a mental body through which we think. There is yet a higher body that might be called the soul body, the causal body. We're not very conscious in that yet. We're trying to wake up there. In that body is stored the digested experience of every incarnation we've ever had. To wake up and know ourselves to be everything we've ever been is a bit more than we can handle, or we would be doing it. That's why we bite off a small chunk of that for one incarnation at a time. We're trying to master this bit of ourselves with its problems. When we can handle all these varieties of combinations of the things that are us, then we can be all of it at once and wake up as a soul in human form. At that point, Ogoides has finally done his job. He's been spending millions of years working with us on this. I'll say more about that later. Ogoides, guardian angel, part of the Davic kingdom, parallel kingdom human. You can study up on that. The angels, actually, archangels, fairies. It's a whole parallel kingdom that is not like the human kingdom. It doesn't ever come down into this dense a material. It only comes as dense as etheric, which is like our energy bodies. Okay, this is a lot of esoteric stuff. I didn't try to lay a lot of groundwork for it. I don't know how much of it you're familiar with, but now we'll retrace our steps through human thinking get back to the esoteric thinking. If you're still with me, I hope you are. Okay. So, I met the idea of God as a child. I think I was very fortunate. I know I was in how that happened because my mother took me to the Church of Religious Science, also called Science of Mind, founded by Ernest Holmes. It's not Scientology. It's the closest thing in Seattle is Center for Spiritual Living with Kathy Ann Lewis. A really positive place to go, especially for people who are recovering from other religions. You'll find a lot of people there for that reason. But what that kind of, this is a religion that didn't hurt me. That was the whole advantage of it. I didn't have to unlearn a thing. What it taught was that God loves us, that God helps us, that we are limited only by our own beliefs, that if we can work on those, open up our thinking, be willing to accept good, if we can, one of the sayings was, you can have self-pity or you can accept your good. And the good is just waiting in this religion. In fact, they're some of the early teachers of the prosperity kind of consciousness things that you see these days, that the whole universe is creative machinery, is waiting for us to harness it. That we're creators, we're mini gods that create. And we do this through the mechanism of the universe's manifestation processes. Things start as ideas. They take the clothing of desire matter from the emotional world. That desire draws together the things that make this idea into a concrete physical thing. Just, this very podium I'm at was an idea at one point. Somebody desired that idea should become manifest, adding emotional clothing to it. And that emotion drew together the materials and the wood to actually produce a physical podium. That's the essence of the science of manifestation. Well, this Church of Religious Science taught that we all can use this. We can bring abundance and wealth and all kinds of things to our lives by applying that. When I was 12, living in Salt Lake City amongst the Mormons, I got some different points of view from them about religion. And at that time, I lost the 9 billion names of God. It was a library book. And I think maybe some of my Mormon neighbors picked it up off the lawn where I had been reading it because they wanted to know what we Gentiles were up to. And that was such good bait, you know, the 9 billion names of God, they had to know. So this book was a science fiction book named after a story in it by Arthur C. Clarke about, it's a great story about monks in Tibet who determined that the reason God had made humankind was that God wanted all 9 billion of his names written down. And so these monks were working on it, and they had written down many of these names, and they had about 25,000 years to go of name writing. And then they found out about computers. And they hired a couple of computer experts, and the story is told from the perspective of these two computer experts who go to Tibet and set up the computers and the printers, and it is churning out the names of God. It's all happening so rapidly that the two computer guys get a little scared that what's going to happen when it prints them all? You know, these guys are going to want their money back. So they lit out early. They just headed down the road one evening, and as they were halfway to town from the monastery, they said to each other, you know, it's about now that last name should be printed. I'm glad we got out of there. And they breathed a sigh of relief and kept walking. And then the stars started going out. So, well, 9 billion names of God is an interesting concept because we have 7.5 billion people on this planet. And no two of them are thinking of the same thing when they think of God. They might as well be thinking of 7.5 billion gods. We see everything through our beliefs and our ideas, and we've concretized these views into filters, basically. It applies to everything in our lives. We see other people through filters of, they're out to get me. You know, hopefully we don't have bad filters like that, but people live horrible lives because of bad filters. We look at God through two clairvoyants who can actually see such things, see the thought forms, the emotional and mental material associated, agglomerated together that makes up ideas. The God concepts we might have can be beautiful. They can be floating in our aura, looking a lot like these lights here, floating above somebody's head, you know, God concepts. And if you really tuned in on what those were, there might be an angelic figure in there, and a big benevolent God with a white beard, and many people's conception. Yet they're all interference between us and a direct connection with any divine being. All of our ideas are limiting factors in trying to connect something higher. So we're talking about, the title of the talk is The Future of God. This is where God evolves. All of our different ideas are evolving individually and in humankind as a whole. I mean, even if you look at the Bible, you look at the Old Testament and you've got he's a pretty brutal God, actually. You know, lots of smiting. And then you get onto the New Testament and forgiving and loving and, you know, brotherhood and turn the other cheek. That's a nice step forward, you know. That's a different God concept. So if we're trying to up-level our own God's concepts, we're contributing to the future of God for everybody. And if it's not a little thing to have bad God concepts. People with concepts of God as a punishing being often think they can act as the agent of that punishment. And very bad things happen with bad God concepts. We can improve humanity tremendously by lifting them up. So these thought forms, that's what they are, ideas, thought forms, emotional, mental material together, they have a lifespan. They'll wear out on their own if we don't give them any attention, but they also will wear out more quickly when they're brought into contact with facts, such as the facts of science. You know, God concepts of heaven being literally up there have the friction with the fact that we've gone beyond there in rockets and everything kind of broke that idea down. And if you can get enough facts about reality into play in your mind, it will cause friction with old, bad God concepts that you might not even know you have. So it's all happening in the subconscious, churning continually. You know, the people's God concepts might be categorized in a way. Father Maximos of Mount Athos, a Greek Orthodox father, priest there. Mount Athos is in Greece, by the way. It's a 1,000-year-old, this peninsula with 1,000-year-old monasteries. A very cool place to go, where they've actually preserved some of the original good stuff of old Christianity. When somebody comes to them, they classify the person in, and I mentioned this in an earlier talk, but it's so good, I mention it again. This person might be a slave of God. That's how they see themselves. You know, don't hurt me, God, and you know, fear of God, and a victim of God might be another name of that too. Basically, God is the all-powerful thing that causes me so many problems, but I'll be good. That's one categorization, and then next is the employee of God. Somebody who's, you know, they've got an arrangement. You know, I pay my tithe, I go to church. God, you can take care of me, right? We got a deal, right? Employees of God. And the next category is the children of God. The people that know they're part of everything and everything is divine, and they know that love is ruling the whole thing anyway, and that a God that didn't love would not be a God they were interested in anyway. So each of us is progressing through similar stages and has to wherever we might be right now. We've had incarnation after incarnation trying out God concepts and throwing out and up-leveling them. So we're going to talk about dark side of God. We're going to have to talk about the personality disorders of God. Some of these gods that people conceive of and believe in have some big problems, like jealous rage. You know, and as we mentioned, the narcissistic need to be worshipped is a personality disorder. The need to control and command and judge and condemn. Only the human mind can project such human things onto any divine being. There's no divine being that is anything like that. They wouldn't be, they can't be. You can't get from the human kingdom into a higher kingdom without being beyond any of these ego-driven, fear-based things. Fear is about separation. In the human kingdom, we really are playing a lot with separation. But separation, it doesn't mean the same thing at all when you've got collective consciousness in the next kingdom. So why do we come up with such awful God concepts? Just one speculation on my part, I didn't read this in Laurency, but I think maybe we like to have a God we can blame. You know, rather than take responsibility ourselves. I saw a great musical in town recently called The Book of Mormon, and I haven't laughed so hard in a long time. Just to see these squeaky clean Mormon missionaries put into Uganda with the people suffering under every possible awful thing happening to human beings. That contrast, who knew you could get so much humor out of it and so many great dance numbers. But one of the dance numbers and songs was about how when the Ugandans were telling the missionaries, you know, when something bad happens, we say, Hasadiga Iboai. Daughter has AIDS, Hasadiga Iboai. The warlord has come and killed somebody, Hasadigi Boai. And the missionaries are saying, oh, that's great. You've got something, you know, you've got a philosophy here, and you know, you're trusting in life, trusting God. Isn't that what that's about, what you're saying? It's all really going to be okay. And they say, well, yeah, it means God. It means F you, God. That's what Hasadigi Boai means. This is kind of shocking to the Mormons, but you know, if you look at what these personality disorders have got, it's no wonder we have atheists that so actively reject God. Not just like, I don't believe in God. It's like, no, you know, well, it's an emotionally driven thing, and I think a lot of the energetic atheism that's out there is feeding on just how bad these God concepts are, and it's kind of a mutual thing. People have, of course, been betrayed by priesthoods for how long now? You know, priesthoods that try to have control over us by threatening us with eternal damnation, or promising us eternal heaven, promising that the consequences of our actions can just be wiped clean by them, or at least an arbitrary God could wipe them all clean. People feel very manipulated and disillusioned now, and that drives the atheists. And it's no wonder that you have people even now becoming something like fact atheists. It really amazes me that now you've got scientists that are bought up by corporations, and people are disillusioned with the scientists. And you've got politicians that are so obviously corrupt, and people are disgusted with them. You have people now who are atheists about everything. They're going to reject, well, they say there are planets up there, but, you know, I don't trust the scientists anymore. You know, well, that's terrible. So, what religion was supposed to be doing all along was lifting our emotional nature. That was the role of a religion in human society, to get us out of hatred and jealousy and greed and the lower emotional rages and all that kind of stuff that we've indulged in for so long as new humans learning. Trying to refine our emotionalities to the higher emotional levels of affection and gratitude and appreciation of each other and love and aesthetic appreciation of cooperation and unity and the beauty of nature. All of that is in the higher emotional nature. Religions have had some successes. You really have to give it to some religions, maybe some more than others. I don't want to single any out. But ultimately, it's not a very good track record, or we wouldn't have had the world wars. That kind of stuff doesn't happen unless people are functioning from their lower emotional levels. Easily made into nationalistic, angry, haters of everybody but us kind of people. Another reason we might have a God like that is maybe we just really like the drama. You know, we don't want a boring, nice God. But if we want drama, how about let's follow some other deity ideas like worshiping volcanoes. You know, at least you've got something truly awe-inspiring and humbling. You know, humans need to be humbled a bit, and tuning into nature really helps us realize, okay, there are great forces, and it's good to be humble. You know, there actually are. I mentioned the Davic kingdom. There are great devas that inhabit these volcanoes. And in some cultures, they may actually have sensed and tuned in on those beings. But those beings don't want to be worshipped any more than the other beings in the higher kingdoms do. And we end up projecting our usual nonsense onto these same beings, and they don't like that either. So the nature worship things tend to go wrong, and typically just all these religious approaches get hijacked by people who are trying to manipulate people. So let's talk about the traditional Christian God. That's what most of us are probably most familiar with. It's a very confusing God with, it's like I said, the Old and New Testament basically contradicting each other. You know, an eye for an eye and turn the other cheek, and it's a mishmash of Gnostic symbolism that was not understood by the Eusebius and Constantine, the two people that constructed the original Bible. If they didn't understand it, they sometimes messed it up. There's a mishmash of Jesus and the Holy Spirit, and the huge argument that they all started off with, well, was who came first, God or Jesus, or were they both at the same time, or really? That's what they wanted to argue about. When they first put the Bible together in 326, the very first gathering at Nicaea, they argued over that, and some people rejected from the religion because they said Jesus came after. I don't know which side won. So right from the start, the Orthodox, the outward presentation of Christianity had many problems. But it's evolved, we're not burning people at the stake anymore. Only 1 million so far, but now we're done, I hope. We get into the new concept of what I call good king God. That's a much friendlier God concept. The guy with the white beard on the throne, he's got authority, but he's good. He's a good creator, and certainly a he. That's very clear in this construct, and expects discipline, has some rules. It's really like kind of an idealized parent, this God. Unlike personality disorder God, the bad things are relegated to Satan. You've got good King God, and he doesn't have to deal with bad things because Satan's covering it. But who set this up? It's really like bad God, good God. Why have this odd disparity? If good King God has so much power, well, anyway, those kind of questions we can argue about, but let's move beyond to such a limiting thought form of God, really. The God on the throne with the beard. I do want to cite the good parts of it, administering justice and ruling heaven, and you can be atoned with this God. This is all good. This is the employer God, really. You make a deal with this God. I'll go to church and you're going to put me in heaven, right? So we'll come back to the idea of an individualized God a little bit. But this good King God concept keeps evolving. People say, well, it's God. He must have all power. He must know everything. He must be omniscient and omnipresent. And then we get into a new concept of God that is taken more and more attention as time's gone by. This I call super everything God. The God that is everything, is everywhere, knows everything. This actually aligns with esoterics a lot better. It kind of handles the Satan thing because evil actually fits into that plan in a way. It's divine feminine gets reintroduced into that picture to some degree with this is another aspect of God evolution, the shamanism, bringing in the feminine and the masculine. But people are evolving, and I think people are willing to think of a bigger God now. And so if you look at the everything, everywhere God, one thing I really like about that is that I get to be part of God in that God concept. And you are too. We all get to be part of God. And that kind of answers the question of God evolving. We're obviously evolving. So, future of God, we're participating in that. We're evolving in that as part of that. It's still not quite what esoteric says, but it's a step up, I think. There's an old story from India about Brahma, the original God, I guess. I don't quite know how the pantheon works there, but Brahma was bored. And so he created Maya. And Maya proved to be a very interesting companion. Maya said, let's play a game. And Brahma said, okay, you have to do whatever I say, said Maya. Okay. And she said, okay, here we go. And she chopped Brahma up into a million different pieces and put a little piece in every person. Actually, the first thing she did is ask Brahma to create all the people. I forgot that part. And then put little bits of Brahma in everybody. And she said, okay, here's the game. I'm going to make you forget who you are, and you have to find yourself. So here we are, all finding our little bits of God in each other. It's a great story. Being part of this God fits with the esoteric concept of all consciousness being one consciousness. That would be the ultimate God consciousness, the one consciousness. It makes sense out of the beauty of everything and the harmony of everything that would be if humans didn't mess it up. That's God in that waterfall and in nature. It's all It's all beautiful because it's all God. And we're beautiful too if we don't mess it up with human silliness. That's a wrong word. But the beauty makes sense in the view that we're all part of God. And it leads to loving understanding and forgiveness and willingness to bridge gaps. And how can we hold people in judgment if we see that person as really just us actually struggling through whatever? And it's hard to do, because I think we'd be shocked if we saw each other, if we could really get in someone else's mind and see ourselves as they see us. I think we really have kind of cartoony understandings of each other that don't go very deep. But this effort to understand each other as all being part of God, that does help with that. But with this super everything God, you find this in religions as this one big God doing everything, talking to everybody, running the whole show, creating everything. Well, what about all these other beings that esoterics has told us are far beyond human? Well, it kind of makes sense. This super everything God is going to do a little delegation. Say, okay, here, amazing godlike being, you're in charge of this galaxy. And here you can be in charge of the solar system. Well, the galaxy God gets to put the God in charge of it makes sense. If you've got these divine beings, it's all organized. And in fact, that corresponds to what esoterics tells us is really going on. And that's why the word God isn't used much in the higher levels, because these beings are all doing individual roles at every level of existence. And talking about the one God is really just talking about the one consciousness that you really don't address directly. Although, if you're in Tevye, in Fiddler on the Roof, you do address God directly. I really liked that in Fiddler on the Roof. He's God, God, I know that we're your chosen people. But once in a while, can't you choose somebody else? He says. And when I saw that movie long ago, I really wanted to have conversations with God like Tevye's, God, I know you made many, many poor people, he says. And being poor is no shame, but it's no great honor either, he says. And then he sings a song about being a rich man. So that gets us into, if we're going to have super everything God, and we've talked about the good king God. The good king God's kind of distant. Super everything God is right here, but can we really talk to super everything God? What about personal God? Who's Tevye talking to? And when we try to talk to God, well, that gets us back to the thing that so few seem to be talking about. Our own souls, this divine being that's been hanging out with us for millions of years, although not playing that big a role for the first many thousands of incarnations, because Agodes looks on and basically lets the law of sowing and reaping teach us through all of our barbarian lives and into our civilized lives. When we start showing the signs of higher emotionality, having done what religion is supposed to be doing and lifted our emotionality, we're trying to actually help others and look for God in others and do good things, then we're starting to think like our souls, because that's what the Agodes has been thinking like all along. Then it becomes possible for Agodes to set up opportunities called destiny for us. Agodes is doing this all the time. We participate in this in between incarnations. Agodes is actually not in charge of karma. That's actually, it's part of the whole, a different group of beings beyond human that make sure that there is perfect justice. One of the great things esoterics tells us is that every thought, word, and deed is met with a response in proportion to it. It causes the exact kind of repercussion. And that applies to the whole species and all of the things that we set out of balance. Humans are great at tipping things out of balance. Well, it all gets restored, and we don't have to actually worry about that it will happen. Humans get too carried away trying to force justice into situations where it will be taken care of. And we are not really capable of determining what justice should be applied. So, what we hear about Agodes in the esoteric books is Agodes wants to be felt as God's presence in us. That the still small voice. That if we can get calm enough, and life is shouting in our ears all the time, basically. We got and even more so in this modern world with our phones and everything distracting and drawing our attention at all times. To actually tune in on a higher being, nothing is forced on us by a being that understands the law of freedom, that doesn't force anything on anybody. Well, we've got to actually be receptive. We're going to have to be listening really hard and tuned in to actually make that connection. It's worth trying if you've never tried it. People have what's called the agape experience, where their consciousness stretches out. It's happened to me once in this lifetime, when I was about 25 years old. You read many accounts of this, that people have had the experience of suddenly it's an expansion. They often describe it as where they felt the sense of unity with everything. That the barriers dropped away, the sense of the mundaneness of the moment dropped away, and they could feel how they were part of everything and the greatness of it all. And for me, it was, I was about 25, and I was in another point where I said, I need to understand. I just did not understand, and I needed to. And I know what happened. Now, I know better from studying this. Agoades, guardian angel, lift me up to his level of consciousness. This is another thing about Agoades. It wants you to think of you as it. This is an odd part of it, that Agoades is holding this place for you, wanting us to identify with the soul consciousness. It's holding that consciousness, but it is still us that we are trying to become. We're trying to become the soul. Agoades is currently holding that space for us. So I was lifted to that, and I had a sense of the tremendous awareness and confidence and level of responsibility for many beings that happens at that level. That stuck with me. And to come back down into ordinary human living is quite a drop on the floor. I mean, just, oh, life, it's nothing compared to what that kind of consciousness is. And that's what many of the mystics who've had an experience like that say. It can be tough. But to have that sense of, oh, this is me, this is what is my potential, that stuck with me all my life. And I won't let my overactive mind talk me out of it, because this is the problem. We have these experiences that go to our hearts. There's soul experiences we know full well. We've experienced something real. And then we've got our mind just nattering away. This could have been an illusion of some sort. You could have fooled yourself. You were probably asleep. Hey, did you? Well, you were sleep deprived. Yeah, that's the ticket. So I hope everybody has that experience at some point. Agoades appears actually in the Bhagavad Gita as Krishna. Krishna meets Prince Arjuna, Prince meaning an advanced human at the level of ready to move, nearly ready to be done being human, so it can work consciously with Agoades. God joke. How to make God laugh. Tell him your plans. We're really not that great at making plans for ourselves. We have to. I mean, that's how we progress. We try to make a good plan for ourselves. But the fact is, you've got Agoades who sees the whole picture, is fully in conscious contact with every other human soul on the planet, knows where you've been at in all your previous incarnations and what's possible for you in the future. It's got a better plan. So if we can tune in and really get in harmony with our divine self, guardian angel, Agoades, soul, whatever you want to call it, this is where words kind of fail, and we're working in harmony with that, well, that's going to really speed things along for us. And we'll meet the goals that this incarnation had if we tune in on that. And the best way to tune in on Agoades is try to think like a being that has no ego. Think like a being that's all about love, that is in perfect contact with everything and can see clearly what's really going on. What is that being's focus? It's about seeing, well, this is how it is. This is how people are suffering. This is what I need to do. If you can get tuned into that, the plan will start to become more obvious to you. Well, if we're going to talk about religion, we have to talk about faith. We've got to take a lot of this on faith, essentially. Where is faith? Well, if we talk about faith, we're going to talk about the path of the mystic, because this is one stage everybody goes through in their series of human incarnations. It's a natural phase where we decide that we want the contact, we need it, we're going to have it, and it's more important than anything else. And maybe this happens in a monastery, maybe it happens in the midst of working in the world. It can vary, but eventually this particular path includes letting go of everything, conceptions of God, the ideas we have about life. Many of us are on that path. Many of us have actually been through that. But going through that process, you end up with a very direct contact, and it's bliss, and it's wonderful. We know it's true that there is a divinity that we're part of, that we connect to. And before that was chop wood, carry water. After that is chop wood, carry water, as the Zen saying goes. We come back to ordinary human life once again from this exalted contact place and realize, now what? We're back amongst all of our suffering brothers and sisters, and we love them even more, and we care even more about, what they're going through. What are we going to do now that we've actually made this contact we wanted so badly, which was all about us making the contact? What can we do to help? Well, for that, you need facts. That's when you become an esotericist studying these facts. So the path of the mystic, it's not a bad thing. It's also something, if you've already done it, it's a cop-out to try to do it again and go back to the monastery. Something to realize about yourself. Is that really going to serve you? So let's talk about where faith is well placed and where it's not. Faith is misplaced in a priesthood that says that only it can connect us to God. That's a huge mistake. And maybe I think I was a priest or two, different incarnations along the way, and maybe I'm working off some of that right now. But that's really a pretty terrible thing to tell people, is you can't contact God. I'm the guy in touch with God. That's awful. Faith is well placed, according to esoterics, in justice, that there is ultimate, perfect justice, that it will be done. Faith is well placed in ourselves, that we have this divine core. We will be what we intend to be. We are not, any of us, hopeless cases. Faith in love. Love is, according to esoterics, the greatest power of them all, greater than any other. It exists on all the planes of existence. Faith in the triumph of good. It's just a matter of time. Just like esoterics has told us that our consciousness evolution will continue. We can, even if we try to slow it down, we'll make mistakes we learn from. We cannot help it. We're going to eventually progress, graduate from the human kingdom. This is inevitable. As it is for the entire human kingdom, good will triumph. We will all progress. We'll all overcome the limitations. Faith in nature, it's been running perfectly. We ought to, now that we've tried to run things ourselves, we ought to have more respect for how well nature has been running things. It keeps going sustainably. How hard is it? It's so hard to make something sustainable. Nature's been doing it for millions of years. So, if we're going to talk about God, we also need to talk about the challenges to God. You can see fascinating YouTube videos of Christopher Hitchens, an atheist who is very eloquent and witty and just really makes his points well. He's debating Dinesh D'Souza, who represents the God side, and Dinesh he's trying hard, he's inspired, he does really believe what he's talking about. And these two go at it. It's fascinating, the fireworks fly, but they're really not going to actually get anywhere interesting to me because they don't have facts. They're talking about what humans do and books that humans have written, and without actually these esoteric facts, you can't logically deduce, well, these esoteric facts aren't something the human kingdom can come up with on their own. They're given to us by those who've gone beyond. That's the only way you can really get the truths of things. Human beings are not capable of ascertaining them for themselves. So, like I said, atheism, the energy of it, it's challenge to God. There's atheism comes from bad religion. I don't mean the band. Another challenge to God is physicalism, which is really what science is ultimately all about. And I want to give science some serious praise here, because science is what liberated us from the rule of religion. And without science, we could still be brought up on charges of heresy. I could be for this talk right now and dragged in front of a court and sentenced to jail. And that only stopped happening about 150 years ago, because it finally became just too hard to prosecute. And it's because of science and the Enlightenment and better philosophies of life. Another great thing that science does, when you have a town and their crops fail, they're looking for somebody to blame. And there's that woman living on the edge of town that doesn't seem to like anybody. Of course, it's because of the things we did to her, but still, she doesn't seem to like anybody. So let's burn that witch, because she's probably the reason all our crops went bad. It's science that has stepped in and saved that poor woman's life. So let's give it some credit. But science has its own almost religious side, where it has a taboo against investigating anything beyond the most concrete and dense of material, detectable, metered, measurable things. Science could actually investigate the clairvoyant vision that so many people have now. So many healers can actually see the energy bodies of people. Science can investigate that and conduct experiments to show, well, they are seeing something. Two of them describe the same thing. That would be a valuable thing. The scientific method is a powerful tool. So, science is, at its current state, technology is dangerous without us lifting our emotional nature to a higher level. High technology and science in the hands of repellent, emotional human egos is a recipe for the destruction of humanity. We're really put on notice, actually, by the power that we have right now as human beings. Put on notice, we're going to have to improve, ourselves, whether it's from the power of nuclear weapons or the power of being saturated with weapons in this country. So I'm personally not going to wait 500 years for science to actually, this is what Laurency says, in about 500 years science and the elite of humanity will accept that Hylozoics, this description of reality, which is essentially what Hylozoics is the only description that's worth, that holds up. But that's a long time to wait. Even now, they've got some nice clues, though. I mean, all these higher worlds that coexist with this world where these higher beings live, they go on, and I'm not going to try to go into how many of these there are, but they're detectable by science now. In all the worlds is love, and I can't say for sure that's the same thing, but science has detected the material of all of the higher worlds by the fact that it has gravity. They call it dark matter, because they can't detect it in any other way except for the fact that it is attractive. So, there's a big fat clue for science. So that's physicalism and science. There are enemies of truth as well. When religions, politicians, people of tremendous wealth that would do anything to remain wealthy, when they want power over people, they do it. They maintain their power by manipulating people through their lower emotional nature, by keeping everybody divided. And the truth is that we are all one. Truth is liberating. The truth that we can actually and will actually figure it all out and work together and do amazing things. Well, if we start figuring that out, a lot of powerful people will lose their power. And that's really what evil is all about in human life, is people who insist on their power at any cost. I mean, we've got the Russians planting propaganda on Facebook that is playing with our religious conceptions simply because they want to mess with us. And to them, lies are a perfectly wonderful way to achieve their end of getting the guy they want elected. I just saw one today. one of the Facebook memes they had was Jesus arm wrestling Satan. And the caption was, Satan says, "If I win, Hillary wins." And Jesus says, "Not if I can help it." And people share that stuff over and over again. We've got such gullible people that just want, if it's what they want to believe, they'll believe it. So I really feel sorry for the people that the Russians hired to be professional liars and put this stuff out there and divide people with it. It's a really ugly thing to do. So there's a perfect example of religion in the hands of powerful individuals hurting the poor people that buy it. Tyrants, Hitler, all those people, they were down on religion, or unless it served their purposes. It's always going to be the case. Powerful people will use religion. And the problem of evil that I mentioned, I have another talk on it called The Great Truths and the Great Lies, and I go into a lot more detail. And esoterics does give a lot of detail on how evil works in this world and why it's the way it is and how it's organized and why it's allowed to continue and from levels above that could easily squash it. But the biggest challenge, I think, to religion is how can a merciful, loving, all-powerful God not stop X from happening, whatever X might be? Why doesn't God stop this? How can there be a God if this awful thing happened? Well, all divine beings are subject to the same laws that we are trying to become aware of and work within to make our own progress. They have no right to interfere in the sowing and reaping that we've set up for ourselves. And as bad as it is, it's exactly in proportion to what has been done. When we see awful things happening, it just shows how awful people have been able to be. And we have the right to be that awful, because if we didn't, we wouldn't really have free will. If we weren't able to choose, there wouldn't be progress. We have to have the ability to choose the good and the bad, or choosing the good is meaningless. Being forced to choose the good doesn't help us at all. Do we expect a divine being to come down and break up the fights and take away the dangerous toys like a parent? Well, apparently the divine beings want to treat us like adults. The law of sowing and reaping is considered harsh for this reason, but it's also the most beautiful thing there is, because if you're planting love out there, it's love that comes back. Anyway, aren't we, we're all doing that, right? We're all planting the seeds of love. Good, because pretty soon you run out of harvesting this bad stuff, and you're only harvesting the results of the seeds of love, and everything turns to heaven for us as individuals. Nothing can hurt us that hasn't been a seed we planted ourselves somewhere along the line. That's what esoteric says. Okay, here's an example. An addicted mother fails to take care of her child. In some future incarnation, she is the child. This is kind of how it works, but there's something else here too. There is mercy, in the form of the mercy that individual can learn before the reaping of that, sowing happens. Sowing, reaping. There's an opportunity in between for that person to wake up and see in another life that I don't want anybody to suffer that way. And when they go help those other addicted mothers or those children who have suffered, they offset the bad reaping. And we can all do this when we actually respond to the suffering in the world by just simply recognizing that they're us. These suffering people are us suffering too. When we recognize that, we can offset even the bad reaping that we have coming. So, let's talk about what God gives us. God has it's cargo cult kind of aspect. People expect God to be dropping blessings on us all the time and giving us lots of things. So let's talk about what we're really given. And one of the things is information. Like Laurency has given us, and I'm talking about in this talk. That's really precious stuff. We should take advantage of that. In fact, it wasn't even available to all of humanity in this current cycle of human civilization until 1875. The planetary hierarchy decided, okay, there are too many people who are ready for this information. We can no longer do individual one-on-one teaching with masters and disciples teaching them. We're going to have to publish the information for all the people who are ready so that they get a chance to have it. The ones that, from the cultural level, incarnating at an advanced level, need this information. And at that point, Blavatsky's job was to reintroduce it. Helena P. Blavatsky, the founder of the Theosophical Society. That teaching has evolved too. Laurency, I think, does the best job of summing it all up and drawing the best from all the Bailey works here too are part of that same dispensation. We're also given information among these facts are facts about the laws of life. I mentioned the law of sowing and reaping. This is an immutable thing. Working with it, as I said, there's a way to work with it where you're being dragged along, a way to work with it where you're setting things up for yourself that are beautiful. The law of unity. You know, the criminal who hurts another person, or the cop with the itchy trigger finger, this is all because of fear and separation. The law of unity says that all of our efforts in the direction of unity improve everything. It's where we're headed, realizing that all this fear is part of this illusion of separateness. Recognizing that this is our brother and sister, this is us. This is, when are we going to get it? You know, we've got the Bible telling us that even. As bad as the Bible can be, you've got Christ saying, you know, that we're all children of God. We're all siblings. So the law of unity says we have responsibilities for ourselves and for our agreements, that once we get to know unity, there are fantastically wonderful things that come out of it on every level. I mean, even there's physical unity, there's sexual, that we all have a pretty good idea how great that can be, hopefully. And that's just like the lowest kind of unity. Every other level higher, you know, with their great, wonderful experiences to be had in new recognitions of unity. And as we get towards the end of the passage through the human kingdom, we start to share in some of our own consciousness among each other to some degree as part of recognizing unity. It's kind of a step towards that collective consciousness, the next kingdom. Now, those who don't get it about unity end up on the path of power, and that's really a tough place to be, because there's never enough power for one person, you know, not as a separate ego. No one can make themselves safe no matter how much power they have. And there's some bad directions people can take, source of a lot of our wars and problems. The law of self-realization. Laurency says, I'm just going to quote him here, it's valid in all kingdoms, and all individuals have to explore their worlds by their respective means and learn to apply the knowledge and insight gained. So it applies to the gods, to us. It implies that man must save himself, however many incarnations he uses on that project. It's absolutely firm law which no God can do anything about. The law of freedom I mentioned, which is essentially the golden rule, you know, do unto others, you'd have them do unto you. Esoteric says that's not just a good idea. That actually is the law of life. And if you infringe on that law, you are going to limit your own freedom, ultimately. What else we're given? Well, we're responsible for doing what we can. What we can't do, we've got help with. And ultimately, one thing that we can't do is manage human affairs. We're getting perfect proof of that right now. This is the good that can come out of our current government. We can't select leaders who can manage the complexity and the needs of an entire country going through crisis like we're going through right now. We need beings that are beyond human to manage human affairs. Eventually we'll realize that. We'll invite the planetary hierarchy to lead. We kicked them out in Atlantis, and we will invite them back. We kicked them out in ignorance. We were misled by the black magicians of the time who said, well, we'll lead you and you can have everything you want. You know, and we believed that nonsense, and we lost the right to that leadership. And now we see the result of it. It's pretty bad leadership, humans trying to lead themselves. We're given a planet. We only get this one, really. Let's take care of it. We're given a stream of life energy. not to mention bodies. We're given as many of those as we need. Incarnation after incarnation. We eventually pay back for that. It's all credits and debits in the cosmic system. We'll eventually help the kingdoms that provide the materials of our bodies and everything. But we're given as many bodies and incarnations as we need. What a gift. We're given parents that we choose and have earned. We're given this stream of life energy that we can divert into our patterns of resentment or fear or whatever we want. If we stop doing that, we'll have more than enough energy for anything we possibly want. We're given us information about the future, that the Bodhisattva, world teacher, Christ will incarnate again, and we'll all see him. We're told that this new etheric vision is opening up for humanity, like many people actually have, but won't confess to because they don't want to be locked up. But many healers can see the energy body and work with it. I know several people who can. I wish I could. We're told that, well, that we'll make it. I mean, I've emphasized that point before. What can we ask of God? We can't demand anything. But we can certainly, I mean, we're given so much already. And we certainly can't ask God to take responsibility for every mistake we ever made and absolve us of all of our, that's a really arbitrary thing for God to do in complete violation of the laws. No divine being would do that. We can, and prayer, it's kind of a funny thing. We pray, it's like asking a really wonderful parent to love their child. It's not really necessary. But it's okay to want love and joy and light and ask for that and be greedy for it. Actually, it's about the only thing it's okay to be greedy for is love. It's divine love to flow through us, to have it to give. It's okay to want that with great intensity. So, let me just sum up in conclusion that if you accept this idea of the evolution of consciousness, it really becomes possible to do a house cleaning of God concepts, and we can do some scrubbing of the fear of God concepts and the limited views of embodied gray-haired authority figures. Get rid of, scrub out the ideas that God has human failings, that God could be arbitrary or capricious. That becomes possible when we look at what's possible. If we can overcome, if we can overcome the pride that humanity has and what it thinks it understands about everything. That, well, there's God and there's Christ and they're running everything. It's such a naive view to think that it's all organized that way. And our ego that thinks humanity is their finest creation. There's so much more to all this. These divine beings share in all consciousness. We're offered that. One of the best things we can do is take up the invitation of our guardian angel, of our soul, of Agoades, to step up into divine consciousness. It's waiting for us. There are steps we need to take. We have a lot of cleanup to do in general, emotional, mental, but that's what we're doing in the human kingdom. We'll get it done. So let me use the most God-aware greeting that's out there, Namaste. I close with that. It means I salute the God in you. I look for it and I encourage it. I look forward to seeing it fully awakened and free from fear. And I appreciate the time that you've given. And really, you're drawing the God out of me. This is about the best version of me there is, actually, standing up here talking about this. So thank you, and namaste.